Duel Terminal World History, Age 2.0, the Laval invasion of Gemnite territory to the repulsion of Sophia, goddess of rebirth. The Laval invade the Gemnites' territory. The warlike Laval decided to invade the neighboring Gemnite tribe to entertain themselves. The mild-mannered and preachy Gemnites didn't launch a counterattack, but they did rise up against the repeated provocations in order to protect their comrades. Crowned with the title of Lord, he is the first-class warrior who united the combat-oriented Laval tribe. By his orders and directions, many of the vigorous, energetic, and reckless members of the Laval are able to fight in an organized fashion, a warrior with an aquamarine corps, who boasts outstanding defensive might among the Gemnites. He blocks the almost daily attacks that the Laval army launches, giving his allies time to prepare for battle. Meanwhile, Noellia began attempting to break the seal on the Steelswarm. The Vylon intervene in conflicts across the planet. As the Lavals and Gemnites battled, mechanical angels, Vylon, descended from the heavens to intervene and force an armistice. They then began to intervene aggressively in other battles all across the planet's surface. In response to the attacks of the Vylon, the Lavals and Gemnites agreed to a temporary truce, mechanical angels that serve as arbiters who observe the surface from the sky above. In ancient times, the fiends called the Steelswarm had pushed the surface to the brink of extinction, so the Vylon sealed them deep within the earth. In the ancient past, the mobile weapon system Vylon was mass-produced to oppose the Steelswarm. During their battle against the Steelswarm, the Constellars developed entities known as Vylon whose bodies were meant to be impervious to corruption by the thoughts and feelings of the Steelswarm. After the Steelswarm were sealed, the Vylon continued to observe the planet's surface, and they sensed traces of Steelswarm activity deep within Noellia. In order to search for the source, they descended from on high. The anti-Steelswarm weapons known as the Vylon have the ability to sense traces of evil in others. In order to discover those corrupted by the thoughts of the Steelswarm deep inside them, they intervened on the battlefields of many wars and conflicts, where many were generating negative emotions. They then analyzed the data they'd gathered. The Gishki invade the Great Mist Valley marshlands where the Gusto live. The emerging power, Gishki, led by Noellia, decided to try and seize the abundant resources that lay unexploited in the Great Mist Valley marshlands. Thus, they began an invasion to defeat the tribe that protected the Great Marshlands. The Gusto, the Gishki used forbidden magic to transform their bodies into monsters in order to battle. Ariel, who was orphaned, was adopted by Noellia, and grew up to be an excellent mage due to her special training and education. Among the Gusto tribe's fighting styles was their method of man and bird fighting together as one. The tribe, who had once helped Noellia, was confused by her sudden actions, but they decided to fight back against the Gishki in order to protect the Great Marshlands. The true purpose behind the invasion was ostensibly launched so the Gishki could obtain natural resources from the Great Marshlands that would help stabilize its influence as a major player. However, the real goal of Noellia from the beginning for attacking the Gusto was to obtain the power of God. Moreover, the Steelswarm thoughts infecting her mind guided her subconsciously to begin the invasion. The ruins that stand before the Great Mist Valley marshlands, the shrine that stands before the Great Marshlands. God, said to be sleeping in this land, is worshipped and enshrined here by the Gusto. Noellia finishes breaking the Steelswarm seal. There was another reason behind the invasion of the Great Mist Valley marshlands, a hidden side. Noellia was secretly searching for the Steelswarm, who she considered her comrades, knowing that they were sealed near the Great Marshlands. She planned to use her allies to break the seal. The absolute predators swarm out onto the planet's surface. The Steelswarm were freed from the seal of the Vylon and let loose upon the planet's surface. Their ravenous hunger caused them to immediately label every living thing in the marshlands as food, and the predators began to eat their fill by feasting on their Gishki allies who had survived the invasion and broken the seal. As the Steelswarm rampaged, many more fell prey to them and were slain. Emilia dies in a failed Gishki experiment. the Steelswarm inside of Noellia awakened when she delved deeper into the forbidden arts for a way to revive her friend. During an experiment, the daughter of Noellia, Amelia, lost her life in an accident. By forcibly separating the target's soul from its body, the practitioner can alter the soul. This ritual method twists and changes the corpse, but leaves it behind to be sacrificed, allowing one to get 2 entities worth of fighting strength for the cost of 1 sacrifice. Noellia controlled and enslaved her astral body, rendering her soul unable to return to her flesh and blood body. The Great Steelswarm War begins. Having been caught off guard by the revived Steelswarm, the Vylon captured some of them and reported their findings to the Constellar. They then sent out the strongest machine angel, Vylon Omega, and began supporting the main forces of each major tribe in order to buy time for Omega to gather enough energy. The main forces of each tribe worked with the Vylon, who modified themselves to serve as equipment, equipped themselves to the main forces of each tribe. This increased their fighting power while also serving to protect them from being corrupted by the Steelswarm. During the battle against the Steelswarm, Noellia suffered serious wounds and, nearly dead, she retreated from the front lines. Finally, Omega gathered enough energy and was able to cut down the vast hordes of Steelswarm covering the planet's surface, in a single, decisive strike of divine judgment. The Steelswarm were utterly defeated. The thoughts of the Steelswarm corrupt the Vylon. Noellia, who was on the side of the Steelswarm, had feigned her true motivations by siding with the Vylon camp, but she'd also desired to corrupt the Vylon by assimilating with their hive mind. Her scheme succeeded, and she managed to transmit the thoughts of the Steelswarm among the Vylon. Noellia had equipped herself with Vylon Tetra by changing into Tetrager through a ritual, and she'd slowly corrupted him since then. The connected consciousness of the Vylon then allowed for every member to be infected. They received transmissions from Tetra. The Vylon go on a rampage, and the anti-Vylon alliance forms. After all of the Vylon were corrupted, they went on a rampage. Guided by the machine-like purpose of making the entire surface world equal and uniform, they attacked every tribe. In response, 4 tribes on the surface rallied together and formed an alliance, and a new fight began. To repel the Vylon combined to become Vylon Disigma. Steelswarm Roach is born from power of a piece of a corrupted Vylon. A piece of a Vylon that was destroyed during a fight with the anti-Vylon alliance came into contact with a Steelswarm that had secretly survived. The 2 powers of light and darkness dwelling inside the fragment brought about a sudden evolution in the creature that touched it, giving rise to the new entity, Steelswarm Roach. Most entities that touched the fragment would be killed by an intense reaction to the combination of the good and evil forces it contained. But those who could endure the intense symptoms would be able to dramatically evolve, and in that way, Steelswarm Sentinel mutated into Steelswarm Roach. Without Noellia, the Gishki halt their activities, after Noellia was nearly fatally wounded, and left the front lines of the war against the Steelswarm. The Gishki had no one to lead their invasion, so they paused it and joined forces with the other remaining tribes during the war with the Vylon. The Gishki was an organization formed and led by Noellia, and it acted according to her will, so her absence meant the immediate cessation of its activities. Those among the society who remained together also kept fighting together in the Great Steelswarm War, side by side with the other tribes. The 4 tribes opposed Disigma with new powers. Against the continued rampage of the Vylon, the 4 tribes awakened a new power called XYZ in order to oppose them. But Disigma analyzed and absorbed their negative emotions, allowing it to absorb many warriors in turn. 6 warriors were absorbed by Disigma. Merogeist was an XYZ of the soul of Gishki, Amelia, and Musto. Guskraken was the flesh and blood body of Amelia, sacrificed for a ritual art that created a monster. Falcos, who was handled by Kamui, let himself be absorbed in order to save Kamui. Gem Knight Pearl manages to defeat Disigma, as one ally after another was absorbed. Pearl, a warrior associated with the Gem Knights who had no negative emotions, was able to bypass the Vylon and their sensors, and inflicted fatal damage to Disigma, an attack used by Pearl, a warrior who chiefly belongs to the peaceful Gem Knight tribe, that draws out all of his power. His attacks continuous, surging waves caused Disigma to stop functioning before Pearl reached it, and it said that everyone who saw this sight was reminded of a fearsome deity, thus, all of the Vylon were defeated. Noellia returns. The thoughts of the Steelswarm had spread from Noellia and caused Disigma to run out of control, but after its defeat, and with Noellia on the verge of death, they returned to her. As a result, the Steelswarm inside of her awakened, causing her body to rapidly recover. The thoughts of the Steelswarm had nowhere else to go when Disigma was destroyed, so they returned to Noellia. The Gishki use forbidden magic to absorb the Laval. Upon the return of Noellia, the Gishki shifted back to their path of invasion. Their first step was to approach the Laval in a ploy to join forces, but their true intention was to replenish their fighting strength by absorbing them as sacrifices, the form of Gishki chain, after it gained forbidden power by sacrificing the Laval. The fighting strength of the Gishki increased beyond its previous limits as they sacrificed and absorbed basically every Laval. It seemed the tribe known as the Laval had been extinguished, but a lone member, Flogies, emerged from far up in the volcanic mountain where he had been lumberjacking. The Gishki restart their invasion of the lands of the Gusto. At this point, the mind of Noellia was severely corrupted. She showed for the first time that she would use any possible means, no matter how barbaric, to achieve her goals. She restarted her invasion of the Gusto by unleashing a deadly poison on the mighty wind that flowed from the Mist Valley to the Marshlands. The wind massacred most of the Gusto as it spread over the entire Marshlands. The poisonous winds blew across the vast wetlands, causing even the Gusto village to be shrouded in the deadly poison which attacked a being's entire body. Calm, on the verge of death, lost the strength to stand. Did her prayer reach God? As the poisonous winds raged across the vast marshlands, Winda headed to the shrine of Mist Valley and offered up prayers, begging to be rescued. Winda's father, Windar, makes a charge against the Gishki forces and manages to temporarily stop the spread of the deadly poison. The Gem Knights rushed to aid and rescue the Gusto. The Gem Knights knew of the crisis of the Gusto, and they rushed to save them, for they were peoples with the same desire for peace. Gusto Emerald, a new warrior born from fusion, managed to blow away the poisonous winds with their power. Gusto Emerald is a warrior who came about when Gem Knight Emerald fused with a Gusto. Not only can they control the weather and create winds, but they can even change the atmospheric makeup to a limited degree. They have huge, heavy knuckles attached to both of their arms that boast extreme hardness, and are capable of crushing all obstacles in their path. Gem Knight Zirconia is born. In the face of the barbarity of the Gishki, the mild Gem Knights finally felt fury. The veteran warrior Crystal tried to optimize his fusion ability, ascending to the form, Zirconia, which represented his power's limits. His limitless optimization transformed him into a being with no special power, as he sought pure and absolute combat strength. The Evilswarm awaken. As even the gentle Gem Knights became controlled by hate, the surface world was filled with toxic emotions. As a result, the entity known as Evilswarm, the embodiment of wicked thoughts, awakened. The wicked mental entity, Evilswarm, awoke from the corpse the Steelswarm. It possessed the bodies of those who had died in the Great Marshlands during the last Great War, and began to use them to attack the living. The Evilswarm even began to infect the 3 ice dragons that were sealed by the sacred spirit in the past. It wouldn't be long until the day came when they were corrupted enough to start to move. The Evilswarm continues to awaken and expand its corruption. After Evilswarm awoke, it possessed and animated the corpses and wreckage littered throughout the Great Marshlands. The dead began to attack the living, and those who were attacked became Evilswarm themselves, causing the corruption to spread even further. Soon, the Evilswarm phenomenon expanded to infecting the living as well. The 3 dragons of the ice barrier became completely infected by the Evilswarm plague. The Steelswarm were the hosts of the psychic organism, Evilswarm. The Steelswarm were creatures that were compatible with Evilswarmization and hosting the Evilswarm inside their bodies. But did the creatures that became their hosts come from another world? Or did they used to be a species that existed on the surface? The truth is unknown. The mind of the Evilswarm influences whatever host organism it takes. Higher grade Steelswarm. They were the first to adapt to Evilswarmification by having the evil thoughts dwell inside their bodies. Alongside their absolute malice, they possessed an incredibly high intellect, and the power to transmit the Evilswarm into the corpses and wreckage of their prey. Lower grade Steelswarm. They were the corpses of the higher grade Steelswarm's prey in ancient times, that were since possessed by the Evilswarm. Their intellect was quite inferior to that of the higher grade. The Constellar finally arrived, the rapid spread of the corruption of the awakened Evilswarm through the surface world into a period of confusion. It was at this point that the Constellar, Knights of Salvation mentioned in myth and lore, descended onto the world. They launched an all-out assault against the Evilswarm in order to shatter the continually growing chain of evil thoughts, a high-ranking member of the Starlight Knights, the Constellars. Its fighting strength is greater than that of the other Constellars, and it said that the other warriors can lend support attacks while it fights at the front of the battlefield. They had received the reports of the Vylon on the revival of the Evilswarm. The Vylon had been developed to oppose the Steelswarm and observe the surface. The Constellars had received their notice that the Steelswarm had revived, so they'd sallied forth to exterminate the Steelswarm. Noellia breaks the seal on the 3 dragons of the ice barrier. Faced with the deadlock between the wildly rampaging Evilswarm and the advent of the Constellar, Noellia attempted to break the seal on the 3 dragons. However, as the dragons had already been corrupted by the Evilswarm, they revived as the most sinister and evil beings. Noellia performs forbidden magic using Steelswarm corpses. Noellia once again attempted to use the spell that had taken her best friend's life, and succeeded in performing a ritual using the corpses of the Steelswarm, but her body and mind were corrupted into rampaging alongside the Steelswarm. Because of the Steelswarm crest on the surface of the aqua mirror she holds, it can be surmised that she's been completely corrupted by the Steelswarm in body and soul. The Gishki resurrect the corrupted Steelswarm Hercules. Noellia, along with other members of the Gishki, continued to perform forbidden magic, this time using the corpse of Hercules, but those incapable of resisting its intense evil thoughts were instantly corrupted, and this became the form in which Hercules revived. Steelswarm Hercules corrupted the conjurers who performed the ritual. In order to achieve a complete resurrection, he began smashing the aqua mirrors that could undo the ritual. Avance fails his attempted resurrection ritual. Avance desired above all else to revive Emilia, who had been completely erased when her body and soul were absorbed by Disigma. Using a photomirror ritual art that he discovered in an ancient document, he attempted to resurrect the soul of Emilia, but his intense feelings for her caused the ritual to backfire and fail, a mirror that performs rituals by sacrificing the user's soul. Avance intended to sacrifice his own soul. Avance transforms into Levianima. The unstable mental state of Avance during the ritual caused the power of the photomirror to rebound on him. He absorbed the soul of Emilia, which had revived in an incomplete form, and this caused him to undergo a complete change into the uncontrollable monster, Levianima. He lost his sense of self and began rampaging. Avance transformed into a monster, a form of his being that the photomirror drew out from inside his soul. Older brother of Pollux, Castor, kamikaze attacks Psyche-Lone, and dies. Constellar Castor attacked Psyche-Lone, who was indiscriminately attacking everyone in a blind rampage. While he managed to free Noellia from the will of the Steelswarm, Castor lost his life in the process. Evilswarm Castor is born. The Evilswarm didn't fail to notice the fact that Castor had lost his life in a suicide attack. They began to immediately corrupt his corpse, creating Evilswarm Castor, who wielded the powers of both light and darkness. His swordsmanship and ability didn't change in the slightest with his possession, and they greatly contributed to the expansion and influence of the Evilswarm. Noellia completes the photomirror ritual using the art of the cycle. Noellia, who had recovered her senses, regretted the crime she had committed, and released the rampaging Avance from his spell. Then, she decided to revive Emilia using her own soul as a sacrifice for the Aquamirror cycle. By combining the magics of the photomirror and Aquamirror, they attempted to completely revive Emilia in body and soul. The end of Zielgigas, and the inherited Aquamirror, in front of Noellia, who had sacrificed nearly all of her life force, appeared Zielgigas. He had been drawn by the power of the ritual. She defeated him using her remaining life energy, and entrusted her 2 children, from birth and adoption, with the Aquamirror, before drawing her last breath. In order to protect Emilia and Avance, Noellia used the last of her remaining power to destroy Zielgigas. The Gem Knights rushed to the sides of the outnumbered Constellars. The transformation of Castor into an Evilswarm, alongside the infection of the 3 dragons, pushed the Constellar into a crisis. In that state, they united with the Gem Knights, who shared their sense of justice. A new soldier, Seraphonite, was born from the fusion of Virgo and the warrior who controlled the power of the heavens, Lazuli, a soldier born from the fusion of a Gem Knight and a Constellar. She possessed a core that symbolized spreading friendship, and she used that power to help rebuild the Constellar forces. Constellar Pollux strikes down Evilswarm Castor, who slays Pollux in turn. Castor was the elder brother, and Pollux the younger. They had taken down many enemies together throughout their lives, using their synchronized team attack, but after being corrupted by the Evilswarm, the elder brother turned his blade on his younger brother. The 2 of them struck each other simultaneously and with equal power, and the Evilswarm tried to use this unique opportunity to corrupt Pollux as well, the Gemini brothers. Pollux, one of the 2 Constellar who govern the constellation Gemini, confronted his older brother Castor, who had been turned into one of the Evilswarm. Gem Knight Seraphonite and Constellar Rasalhague successfully revived Pollux and Castor. The Gem Knight touched the souls of the 2 valiant heroes, trying to revive them before they were completely corrupted by the Evilswarm, and with help from Constellar Rasalhague, Seraphonite had her power amplified, and the revival succeeded, by the powers of Constellar Rasalhague and Gem Knight Seraphonite. The Constellars and Gem Knights managed to revive the 2 warriors, the Constellar of Ophiuchus. He provides logistical support, and wields a staff that controls healing and resurrection. He appears to have a somewhat different mission from the Constellar of the other 12 constellations. Constellar Ptolemy M7 is born. The Constellar, witnessing the power of fusion of the Gem Knights, became aware of the power hidden deep within themselves, to unite their stars, and unleashed it. 7 chosen Constellars became the divine dragon of legend, and faced off against the Evilswarm in the final, decisive battle, a divine dragon who was a fusion of 7 beings, Acubans, Leonis, Alresca, Aldebaran, Virgo, Algedi, and Antares as the core. With its support and its incredible power, the Constellar returned to the front lines and began to turn the tide of the battle they'd been losing. Ptolemy M7 could split into 2 dragons, creating a belt of light that granted power only to the living. Gem Knight Master Diamond is born. Before the ultimate, decisive battle with the Evilswarm, the power of the 7 Constellar who became Ptolemy resonated with the power of the 7 cores that had gathered as the cores of Zirconia. Thus, the strongest warrior, Gem Knight Master Diamond, was born. Zirconia concentrated the power of the higher-level Gem Knights into Master Diamond, the strongest warrior. He carried a great sword containing the powers of 7 cores which housed the crystallized power of repeated and optimized fusions. The ultimate, decisive battle between Constellar Ptolemy M7 and Evilswarm Ouroboros. In the skies above the Mist Valley Marshlands, the strongest trump card of the Constellar and the most diabolic dragon of the Evilswarm began their battle with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. Many neighboring areas were decimated from the impacts of the fierce battle. And all the while, the divine wind of Mist Valley, which had been witnessed many times in the past, began to form around the 2 dragons. during the battle, Gem Knight Pearl gave up his life protecting Ptolemy M7. As M7 fought the Dark Dragon, the Gem Knight swept away the vast majority of the low-level Evilswarm. The overflowing Divine Wind. The Divine Wind flowed out from the Mist Valley marshlands and filled the surrounding regions that had become the battlefield. It breezed gently over the marshlands, and seemed to be attracted to the Shrine of Mist Valley, an unidentified phenomenon witnessed all across the planet. It always seemed to occur in places that were devastated by war, and was thus said to be the sigh of the divine, grieving over those conflicts. The Divine Wind begins to gather at the shrine. The Divine Wind began to swirl at the center at the Shrine of Mist Valley, drawn to the center of its altar where a deity was enshrined in a great stone. The god there, disappointed by this world that was drowning in war, decided to purify the surface world, the center of the raging winds. Sophia, goddess of rebirth, revives. The altar was destroyed, and from it appeared the giant goddess of rebirth. Unwilling to let the desolation of the surface world continue, she decided to annihilate every living thing on the planet in order to purify it. Sophia, the goddess who created many of the life forms on the planet. Major symbols and designs from each tribe can be seen on her body. The only part of her body visible at the Shrine of Mist Valley is her head. The world is pushed to the edge of extinction by Sophia, goddess of rebirth. In her hands, she held two crystallized embodiments of power which could destroy every living thing in the world and create a new one. The tribe members who stood before her on the front lines were obliterated by her overwhelming power, and it seemed like it was only a matter of time before the entire world was annihilated. From the crystallized power of creation in her left hand, she created an endless horde of soldiers, her children, which surged with overwhelming numbers. Their forms were similar to those of the existing surface tribes. The crystallized power of destruction in her right hand emitted a light that erased every living thing it touched, instantly and all at once. It went beyond physical destruction, it broke down a being's very existence to create new life. Lazuli and Virgo inherit the fusion power of Gem Knight Master Diamond. The damage to the core of Diamond began to exceed sustainable limits, and it became impossible for him to continue fighting. Knowing this, he entrusted his power of fusion to Lazuli and Virgo. The two of them attempted to use that power to fuse with all of the Constellar, a long sword that held the Gem Knight power of fusion, and which had been constantly optimized through their countless battles. Lazuli inherited this sword and used it as the core of her ultimate fusion with 12 of the Constellars. Lazuli and the 12 Constellar. Lazuli fused with the 12 Constellar of the Zodiac. Rasalhague, the warrior of Ophiuchus, had other intentions, so he exempted himself from the fusion. The power of creation is drawn in by the power of fusion. Unable to resist the incredible fusion energy that came of fusing 13 beings, the crystal that contained the power of creation of Sophia was dragged and incorporated into the fusion, creating the ultimate warrior who not only had the power of the stars, but the power of a god. Constellar Somber is born. The warrior of hope, Constellar Somber, wielded power equal to that of a god. In order to save the surface world from doomsday, she faced Sophia in the ultimate, decisive battle. She possessed the weapons of all of the Constellar, and in her right hand she held the longsword she got from Diamond. It was the symbol of the power of fusion, but it was changed into a single-handed sword. The crystal of creation she absorbed emitted a holy light from her chest. Constellar Rasalhague attempts a fusion with the 3 Evilswarm dragons. Rasalhague intentionally kept himself out of the fusion, aiming instead for a fusion that only Ophiuchus could perform. Because they were corrupted in state they couldn't resist due to their seal. Unlike the other Evilswarm, Rasalhague speculated they still had life energy left. They had been sealed, and thus in a state where they could not resist corruption. Rasalhague speculated that they still had life energy left. The 3 dragons, which had been assimilated into the undead army, had their corruption converted into life energy by Rasalhague using his power of revival. He intended to use their power to oppose Sophia. Thanks to the power of the Aqua Mirror, Rasalhague successfully fuses with the three dragons. With the mirror of the ice barrier that was transformed into the Aqua Mirror in hand, the two Gishki youths ran to the aid of Rasalhague. He was struggling to control the three dragons, but thanks to the power of the Aqua Mirror, his fusion succeeded. The power of fusion absorbs the power of destruction. As Rasalhague absorbed the power of the Aqua Mirror along with the three powerful dragons, the entity he was becoming also ended up absorbing the crystal of the power of destruction that lay in the right hand of Sophia. A soldier of Twilight was born, who possessed 4 forces of destruction, 3 from the dragons and 1 from God herself, as well as the healing power of a Constellar. Evilswarm Karakian, the powers of light and darkness collided within his body, and the power of God herself was superimposed onto them, giving rise to the ultimate warrior of darkness, Evilswarm Karakian. He joined the final, decisive battle to support the light of hope known as Somber in order to defeat the planet. With both the staff of Rasalhague and the Aqua Mirror staff in hand, he was able to completely unleash the power of the three dragons' cores floating around him. In his chest is the crystal of the power of destruction shining red-black. With help from Karakian, Somber manages to defeat Sophia. In order to defeat Sophia, who was temporarily weakened by her 2 powers being stolen, Somber and Karakian faced her in a final battle. After several days of non-stop combat, they pierced and broke the orb on her head that served as the source of the power of God, finally banishing her from the surface world. With Karakian sealing the movements of Sophia, Somber ended the battle by using her sword to pierce the orb on the goddess' forehead. Somber and Karakian vanish from the planet. After banishing Sophia, Somber and Karakian themselves vanished from the face of the surface world. Perhaps they were guided by the power of Sophia inside them. Meanwhile, those who survived began to reconstruct the surface world, living and carrying on as the traces of God vanished. The survivors on the planet start rebuilding. After Somber and Karakian vanished, those who survived the Great War reached past their own tribes and worked together. They began reconstruction in and around the vast and still resource-rich Mist Valley marshlands. With God no longer able to help or harm them, what kind of world awaits those willing to forge a future with their own strength? The children of Noellia and the survivors of the Gusto play a vital role in repairing the surface world. The children of Noellia were trained in all sorts of knowledge, and the youngest members of the Gusto, including those saved by Noellia, were the guardians of the great marshlands. Those with key relationships to Noellia had strange beginnings, and they spread their knowledge to the others who'd survived, and in this way they became the driving force behind the world's reconstruction.